What happens when a former president sits down with one of late-night television's sharpest tongues, and the conversation spirals completely out of control? You won't believe what unfolds when political theater meets comedy gold in the most explosive late-night interview of the year. This isn't your typical celebrity appearance. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can go from cordial to catastrophic when egos clash and tempers flare. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Donald Trump faces off against Stephen Colbert in what started as a routine interview but quickly became television history: The Late Show's Ed Sullivan theater bust. With an electric tension that crew members later described as unlike anything they'd experienced in years. Word had spread through the building that tonight's guest wasn't just any political figure. This was going to be appointment television. The audience, packed with both supporters and critics, seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen as the familiar opening music filled the air. Stephen Colbert emerged with his trademark grin, but those who knew him well could detect something different in his demeanor. His opening monologue was sharper than usual, each joke calculated and precise, as if he were warming up for something bigger. The comedian had spent hours preparing for this interview, knowing full well that his guest had a reputation for turning even the most controlled environments into unpredictable spectacles. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, Colbert announced, his voice carrying just enough theatrical flourish to mask what might have been genuine apprehension. Trump strode onto the stage with characteristic confidence, waving to the mixed crowd that erupted in both cheers and scattered boos. He wore his familiar navy suit and red tie, his expression a carefully composed mask of controlled satisfaction. As he settled into the guest chair, the former president's eyes swept across the studio audience, seemingly cataloging every face, every reaction. "Thank you for having me, Stephen," Trump said, his voice carrying that familiar cadence that had dominated news cycles for years. "Beautiful theater you have here. Really beautiful. I've performed in much bigger venues, of course, but this is nice." Colbert's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we're honored to have you. Though I have to say, after everything that's happened, I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I always keep my commitments," Trump replied, shifting slightly in his chair. "Unlike some people. But we're not here to talk about other people's failures, are we?" The host leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "Actually, that's exactly what I thought we might discuss. Your recent legal troubles, for instance. How are you handling the pressure of multiple indictments while running for president again?" Trump's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Those are all hoaxes, Stephen. Complete and total hoaxes. The American people see right through it. My poll numbers have never been higher, which is why the corrupt establishment is so desperate to stop me. But surely you understand why people might be concerned about a candidate under criminal indictment." "Concerned?" Trump's laugh was harsh. "The only thing people should be concerned about is the weaponization of our justice system. This is what happens in banana republics, not America. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've been part of the problem for years." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Colbert's professional smile remained intact, but his eyes had taken on a different quality, sharper, more focused. "Part of the problem? I'm just a comedian asking questions." "Just a comedian?" Trump leaned back, his expression morphing into something between amusement and disdain. "You've been spreading lies about me for years. Night after night, poisoning people's minds with your fake news comedy. You think hiding behind jokes makes you innocent." The audience began to murmur, sensing the shift in dynamics. What had started as typical late-night banter was transforming into something far more personal and potentially explosive. Colbert straightened in his chair, his voice taking on an edge that regular viewers rarely heard. "I think our viewers are smart enough to distinguish between comedy and news. But speaking of lies, let's talk about your claims regarding the 2020 election. You continue to insist it was stolen despite every court, including judges you appointed, finding no evidence of widespread fraud." Trump's face began to redden, the careful composure he'd maintained since walking onto the stage starting to crack. "Here we go again with the same tired talking points. You people never learn. The evidence is overwhelming: massive fraud, dead people voting, machines flipping votes. But you and your friends in the media refused to report the truth. The truth. Colbert's voice rose slightly. The truth is that you lost. Fair and square. And your refusal to accept that reality led directly to January 6th. The mention of January 6th hung in the air like a lit fuse. Trump's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, complete silence filled the theater. Even the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. You want to talk about January 6th? Trump's voice was low but carried a dangerous undertone. Let's talk about it. Those were patriots who were concerned about election integrity. Meanwhile, your side burned down cities for months, and you called it peaceful protest. Colbert shook his head, his composure beginning to show cracks of its own. Those are two completely different situations, and you know it. No one stormed the Capitol building trying to overturn an election based on lies. Lies. Trump stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. The movement was so unexpected that several audience members gasped. You want to call me a liar to my face? After everything your side has done? Security personnel near the stage shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene. The studio cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most dramatic confrontation in late-night television history. Colbert remained seated, but his body language had changed completely. The jovial host persona had evaporated, replaced by someone who looked ready for a fight. I'm calling your claims about the election lies because that's exactly what they are. And I think deep down, you know it too. The words hit Trump like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might do something completely unpredictable. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, and everyone present could sense that whatever happened next would change everything. But this was only the beginning. What came next would push both men past the point of no return, transforming a television interview into something far more dangerous and personal than anyone could have anticipated. Trump remained standing, towering over Colbert's desk like a storm cloud ready to unleash its fury. The former president's hands were clenched at his sides, his breathing audibly heavy in the suddenly silent studio. Every camera in the building remained fixed on the two men, capturing what would become one of the most replayed moments in television history. You know what your problem is, Stephen? Trump's voice was barely controlled, each word dripping with venom. You think you're untouchable. You think you can hide behind your little jokes and your liberal audience and say whatever you want about me. But I know who you really are. Colbert slowly rose from his chair, matching Trump's stance. The host's usual comedic demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by something his viewers had never seen before: raw, unfiltered anger. And what exactly am I, Donald? Please, enlighten us all. You're a coward. Trump spat, pointing an accusatory finger across the desk. A pathetic little man who makes a living mocking people better than him. You couldn't last 5 minutes in the real world, doing real work, making real decisions that affect millions of people. The audience began to stir uncomfortably, some calling out in support of their respective favorites. But both men were now completely focused on each other, oblivious to everything else in the room. Colbert's laugh was bitter and cutting. Better than me? You mean like bankrupting casinos? Like paying off adult film stars? Like inciting an insurrection because you couldn't handle losing? There it is again. Trump's voice boomed across the theater. The same lies, the same propaganda. You people destroyed this country with your fake narratives, and now you want to lecture me about character? I want to lecture you about reality. Colbert shot back, his voice rising to match Trump's volume. Something you seem to have lost all connection with. You live in a fantasy world where you're always the victim, always the hero, never responsible for anything that goes wrong. Trump's face had turned a deep shade of red, veins visible on his forehead. Fantasy world? I built an empire while you were telling jokes for nickels. I became president while you were crying about Hillary Clinton losing. I changed the world while you sat behind this desk whining like a child. You didn't change the world. You nearly destroyed it. Colbert's composure finally cracked completely. Your presidency was a disaster from day one. You divided families, you emboldened racists, you made America a laughingstock on the world stage. The studio erupted. Half the audience was on their feet cheering, while the other half was booing loudly. Security guards moved closer to the stage. But neither man seemed to notice or care about the chaos surrounding them. Trump leaned forward, placing both hands on Colbert's desk. A laughingstock. Under my presidency, we had peace through strength. The economy was booming. Other countries respected us. Now look what your guy has done. Inflation, crime, weakness everywhere you look. My God. Colbert matched Trump's aggressive posture, leaning across his own desk until the two men were face to face. Joe Biden isn't my guy. I'm a comedian, not a political operative. But at least he's not a wannabe dictator who refuses to accept election results. Wannabe dictator. Trump's voice reached a new level of fury. You want to see dictatorship? Look at what they're doing to me right now. Weaponizing the justice system, trying to throw me in prison for political reasons. That's what dictators do. No, what dictators do is exactly what you did. Colbert was shouting now, his face flushed with anger. They refuse to leave office peacefully. They claim elections are rigged when they lose. They send mobs to attack the seat of government. That's dictatorship. Trump suddenly slammed his fist on the desk, causing Colbert's coffee mug to jump and spill. The sharp crack echoed through the theater like a gunshot, causing several audience members to gasp audibly. Don't you dare compare me to a dictator, Trump growled, his voice now dangerously low. I gave this country 4 years of prosperity and strength. I could have stayed in power if I wanted to, but I didn't. I followed the Constitution, even when it was being weaponized against me. Colbert wiped coffee from his desk with deliberate slowness, never breaking eye contact with Trump. You followed the Constitution? Is that what you call pressuring state officials to find votes? Is that what you call telling your supporters to march to the Capitol and fight like hell? I told them to peacefully protest, Trump insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I never told anyone to break the law. Peacefully. Colbert's voice dripped with sarcasm. Is that what you call it when people are beating police officers with flagpoles? When they're chanting to hang the vice president? When they're smearing feces on the walls of the Capitol building? Trump's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with your lies. And I'm done with this pathetic excuse for journalism. This isn't journalism. It's entertainment, Colbert replied coldly. But apparently, you can't handle even that without having a meltdown. The two men stared at each other across the desk, both breathing heavily, both clearly past the point of rational discourse. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself might shatter. Trump straightened up, adjusting his tie with shaking hands. You think you've won something here tonight? You think embarrassing me makes you important? Let me tell you something. Stephen, you're nothing. You're a nobody who will be forgotten the moment you stop being useful to your masters. Colbert stood to his full height, his voice steady but filled with cold contempt. At least I'm not a former president throwing a tantrum on national television because someone dared to ask him hard questions. That was the final straw. Trump's carefully constructed public persona completely shattered, revealing something raw and primal underneath. What happened next would be replayed and analyzed for years to come, marking the moment when political theater became something far more personal and destructive, with Trump's face contorted with pure rage as he swept his arm across Colbert's desk, sending papers, pens, and the remaining coffee flying across the stage. The crash of objects hitting the floor echoed through the stunned theater as audience members recoiled in shock. Several people in the front row ducked as debris scattered in their direction. You want to see a meltdown? Trump roared, his voice cracking with fury. I'll show you what happens when someone pushes me too far. You think you can sit there in your little bubble and destroy people's lives with your lies? Colbert stepped back from his desk, his hands raised defensively, but his expression remained defiant. This is exactly who you are, isn't it? This is what happens when someone doesn't bow down to you. You throw a tantrum like a child. Child. Trump's voice reached a pitch that seemed impossible for a grown man. I'm the one who built a billion-dollar empire. I'm the one who became president. What have you ever done except hide behind jokes and mock your betters? Security guards were now moving rapidly toward the stage, but Trump seemed completely unaware of their approach. His attention was laser-focused on Colbert, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Mock my betters. Colbert's voice was ice-cold now, each word precisely delivered. You're not my better, Donald. You're a cautionary tale. You're what happens when privilege meets incompetence and delusion. Trump lunged forward as if he might try to reach across the ruined desk, but caught himself at the last second. His breathing was ragged, his hair disheveled from his violent gestures. You have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what it takes to lead, to make the hard decisions, to carry the weight of responsibility for an entire nation. Responsibility. Colbert laughed bitterly. You've never taken responsibility for anything in your entire life. Every failure is someone else's fault. Every criticism is a witch hunt. Every loss is because the system is rigged against you. Because it is rigged. Trump screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. Everything you see here tonight proves it. This isn't an interview. It's an ambush. You brought me here to humiliate me, to try to destroy me on national television. The audience was in complete chaos now. Some people were trying to leave while others were recording everything on their phones. The security team had formed a protective barrier around the stage, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Colbert shook his head slowly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Nobody brought you here, Donald. You came here voluntarily. You agreed to this interview. And you're destroying yourself all on your own. Those words hit Trump like a physical blow. For a moment, his rage seemed to falter, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. But the vulnerability lasted only seconds before the fury returned with even greater intensity. Destroying myself. Trump's voice was now hoarse. From screaming, I'm exposing you. I'm showing America exactly what kind of biased, dishonest hack you really are. This entire show is a fraud, just like you. Then leave, Colbert said simply, spreading his arms wide. If this is such a fraud, if I'm such a hack, then walk away. Nobody's forcing you to stay here. Trump's mouth opened and closed several times, as if he were struggling to process the suggestion. The idea that he could simply leave seemed to short-circuit something in his brain. Leave? He repeated, his voice smaller now, but still trembling with anger. You'd like that, wouldn't you? You want me to run away so you can tell everyone that Donald Trump couldn't handle a few tough questions. I want you to do whatever you think is best, Colbert replied calmly. But if you stay, you're going to have to deal with the fact that not everyone in America worships you. Some of us think you're a danger to democracy itself. Danger to democracy? Trump's voice cracked again. I am democracy. I'm the voice of 74 million Americans who voted for me. You're the one trying to silence that voice. Nobody's silencing you, Colbert shot back. You've had the floor for 20 minutes. You've said everything you wanted to say. The problem is that what you're saying is insane. That single word, insane, seemed to drain all the fight out of Trump. His shoulders sagged, his face went pale except for two bright red spots on his cheeks. For a moment, he looked genuinely lost, like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Insane, he repeated quietly, almost to himself. Then his head snapped up, his eyes blazing with renewed fury. You know what's insane? Thinking you can treat a former president of the United States like this. Thinking you can destroy me with your little television show. I'm not trying to destroy you, Colbert said, his voice gentler now, but still firm. You're doing that all by yourself. Trump stared at him for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The entire theater had gone silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Even the security guards had stopped moving, frozen by the intensity of the moment. Finally, Trump straightened his tie and smoothed down his hair with hands that were still shaking slightly. When he spoke, his voice had returned to something resembling normal, though it still carried an undertone of barely controlled rage. This interview is over, he announced, loud enough for everyone in the theater to hear clearly. I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage from someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back at Colbert one final time. You think you've accomplished something here tonight? You think you've shown America who I really am? All you've done is prove that the media is corrupt and biased against anyone who threatens their power. The only thing I've proven, Colbert replied quietly, is that you can't handle being challenged. And America deserves leaders who can. Trump's face twisted with one final surge of anger. Without another word, he strode toward the stage exit, his security detail scrambling to keep up. As he reached the curtain, he turned back one last time and pointed directly at Colbert. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent theater. Not by a long shot. And then he was gone, disappearing behind the curtain and leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members, scattered debris, and the lingering echo of one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. Colbert stood alone at his ruined desk, watching the spot where Trump had vanished, knowing that what had just transpired would be discussed and debated for years to come. The cameras continued rolling as the host slowly began picking up the scattered papers from his desk, the only sound in the theater the soft rustle of paper and the distant murmur of an audience trying to process what they had just witnessed. It was over, but the impact of this extraordinary clash would resonate far beyond the walls of the Ed Sullivan Theater, marking a moment when entertainment became something far more consequential and dangerous.